Billionaire CEO fell in love with his black maid, unaware they were actually twins. He thought he was just a lonely billionaire, and she thought she was just a maid doing her job, but every time she spoke, her voice felt familiar. Every memory she shared felt like his own. Then her little boy looked up at him and whispered something that froze the room cold. A simple sentence that cracked open a lifetime of secrets. Because this wasn't love. It was something far more disturbing and far more powerful, hidden adoptions, a past buried by the system, and a third woman who shouldn't exist at all. When the truth finally comes out, everything he built begins to fall apart. When love feels real, but your identity is a lie, can the truth heal a broken family or destroy it forever? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. In the pre-dawn stillness of Monday morning, Andrew Caldwell stood at his bedroom window, watching the world slowly wake. The pristine grounds of his 10-acre estate stretched before him, perfectly manicured and utterly lifeless. At 42 years old, he had achieved what most would consider the pinnacle of success, a sprawling mansion in the most exclusive neighborhood of the city, a fortune that placed him firmly among the nation's billionaires, and a reputation as one of the shrewdest CEOs in the business world. Yet the silence of his home echoed with an emptiness that no amount of money could fill. Andrew straightened his already immaculate tie, checking his reflection in the floor-to-ceiling mirror. Every dark hair was in place, his custom-tailored suit without a wrinkle. Control and order. These were the cornerstones upon which he had built his life. 6:15 exactly. Time for coffee. His footsteps echoed through the marble hallway as he descended the grand staircase. The morning sunlight streamed through towering windows, casting long shadows across expensive but unused furniture. Everything in its place, everything according to schedule. The coffee maker would finish brewing at exactly 6:20, giving him precisely 40 minutes to review the morning reports before his 7 o'clock video conference. But today something different floated through the air. A melody, soft and sweet, drifting from the direction of the kitchen. Andrew stopped mid-stride, his heart skipping a peculiar beat. The tune wrapped around him like a forgotten blanket, familiar yet maddeningly out of reach in his memory. Amazing, Maeve, how sweet the sound. The voice was gentle, feminine, and brought with it an unexpected wave of something. Something that made his chest tighten. Ah, the new housekeeper, Maeve Walker. She had been vetted by his usual service, her references impeccable. He had approved her hiring without meeting her. He preferred minimal interaction with household staff. Andrew rounded the corner into the kitchen, intending to politely but firmly establish professional boundaries. The humming stopped. Maeve turned from where she was organizing cleaning supplies, and for a moment time seemed to pause. She was perhaps in her early 40s, with kind eyes and an air of quiet dignity about her. "Good morning, Mr. Caldwell," she said, and her voice carried the same gentle quality as her humming. "Your coffee is almost ready. You take it black, no sugar." He hadn't told her that. "Yes," he said slowly. "How did you—" "The kitchen tells its own stories," she replied with a small smile, reaching for his preferred mug. The simple navy one, not any of the expensive designer pieces in the cabinet. This one's been well used. Throughout the morning, Andrew found himself increasingly unsettled. Maeve moved through his home with an ease that seemed impossible for her first day. She placed the cleaning supplies in the exact spots he would have chosen. When he mentioned needing to find his reading glasses, she glanced toward his study and said, "Second drawer of your desk, left side, under the blue folder." She was right. During a brief break between calls, he emerged from his home office to find her arranging fresh flowers in the living room. Without looking up, she said, "These remind me of the ones that used to grow by the old oak tree, remember? The winter was so harsh that year, but somehow they survived under all that snow." Andrew froze. That memory of watching stubborn purple flowers push through the snow behind St. Catherine's Home for Children was one he had never shared with anyone. It was from before, from those years he kept locked away in the deepest corners of his mind. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said sharply, retreating to his study. But her presence lingered, like the echo of that hymn, stirring something he had spent decades burying. With trembling fingers, he opened his safe and withdrew a worn manila envelope. Inside was a single photograph, its edges soft from handling. A group of children standing in front of a brick building, snow dusting their shoulders. His younger self stood at the edge of the frame, serious-faced even then, 8 years old and already learning to be invisible. Andrew sat heavily in his leather chair, the photograph burning in his hands. The woman in his kitchen. There was something about her that reached past all his carefully constructed walls and touched that lonely child in the photograph. For the first time in 34 years, he felt seen. Not as Andrew Caldwell the billionaire, not as the CEO, but as that boy who had once watched flowers grow through snow and memorized hymns in a drafty chapel. The sensation was terrifying, and somehow inexplicably, like coming home. His fingers traced the faces in the photograph, searching for answers he wasn't sure he wanted to find. The morning sun climbed higher, warming the rich leather and mahogany of his study, but Andrew barely noticed. His rigid schedule, his carefully ordered world, everything felt suddenly, precariously off balance. From somewhere in the house, he could still hear Maeve moving about, the soft sounds of her presence both comforting and disturbing. The melody of that hymn seemed to linger in the air, a ghost of memory that refused to fade. He set the photograph on his desk, unable to look away from the eyes of his younger self, finding in them questions he had spent a lifetime avoiding. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 10, its deep chimes reverberating through the house. Andrew remained motionless in his study, the morning's work forgotten, as the weight of recognition settled over him like a heavy blanket. Something fundamental had shifted in his carefully controlled world, and he knew, with a certainty that shook him to his core, that nothing would ever be quite the same again. The afternoon sun slanted through the kitchen windows, casting warm rectangles of light across the polished granite countertops. Andrew stood in the doorway, watching as Maeve prepared a simple lunch of grilled sandwiches and soup. Her movements were practiced and efficient, yet there was something almost musical in the way she worked, as if even the most mundane tasks held their own quiet rhythm. The aroma of melting cheese and toasted bread filled the kitchen. Andrew's stomach growled softly, reminding him he'd skipped breakfast that morning, too unsettled by Maeve's presence to eat. Now, watching her slice tomatoes with precise, careful movements, he felt that same unease return. But it was different somehow, tinged with an inexplicable familiarity that both drew and frightened him. "That smells wonderful," he said, his voice stiffer than he intended. Maeve looked up, a gentle smile touching her features. "Thank you. It's nothing fancy, just grilled cheese and tomato soup. Sometimes the simple things are best." Andrew nodded, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. In all his years of having household staff, he'd never once shared a meal with any of them. The rules were clear, the boundaries well-defined. Yet here he was, about to break his own carefully constructed protocols. "Would you—" He cleared his throat. "Would you care to join me for lunch?" Maeve's hand stilled for just a moment, surprise flickering across her face. That's very kind of you, Mr. Caldwell. Are you sure? Please, he said, gesturing to the breakfast nook where sunlight pooled on the small table. There's plenty, and I don't care for eating alone. She wiped her hands on a kitchen towel and followed him to the table. They sat across from each other, the steaming bowls of soup and perfectly golden sandwiches between them like a bridge spanning some vast, unspoken distance. This reminds me of rainy days at St. Catherine's, Maeve said softly, breaking her sandwich into bite-sized pieces. Sister Mary Margaret would make grilled cheese for everyone. The kitchen would fog up from all the steam. Andrew's spoon clattered against his bowl. You were at St. Catherine's? Maeve looked up, meeting his gaze. Yes, from age 6 until I was 12. The windows in the girls' dormitory leaked whenever it rained, and we'd put towels on the windowsills to catch the water. Andrew finished, his voice barely above a whisper. A heavy silence fell between them, filled with the weight of shared memories neither had expected to find here. Maeve's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her water glass. The nightmares, she said quietly. Do you still get them? Andrew's throat tightened. He hadn't told anyone about the dreams that still haunted him, of dark corridors and endless waiting, of names being called but never his own. Sometimes, he admitted. Less now, but they never really go away. Maeve finished. Even now, I sometimes wake up thinking I hear the bell for morning prayers. The chapel bells, Andrew said, lost in memory. They were always slightly out of tune, especially the smallest one. Maeve nodded, her eyes glistening. My son Noah, he's helped so much with the fears. Having him, raising him, it's given me purpose, something to hold on to when the memories get too dark. She paused, touching the simple cross necklace she wore. That and my faith. God's Maeve has been my anchor through it all. Andrew watched her, noting the quiet strength in her posture, the peace that seemed to radiate from her, despite the pain they were discussing. You raised him alone? Yes, she said simply. It hasn't always been easy, but Noah, he's such a special boy, so intuitive, so kind. He sees the world with such pure eyes. The afternoon light shifted, shadows lengthening across the kitchen floor. They talked more, about their different paths after St. Catherine's, about the ways they'd learned to cope, about the scars that time had softened but never fully healed. Maeve spoke of her faith with a gentle certainty that made Andrew's chest ache with something like longing. As evening approached, Maeve began gathering her things to leave. She'd just finished wiping down the last counter when the back door creaked open. Mom? Noah's voice carried from the mudroom. I forgot my backpack in the sitting room. Maeve called back. Go ahead and get it, sweetheart. We're leaving in a minute. Footsteps padded through the house, then stopped. Andrew looked up to find a small boy standing in his study doorway, backpack clutched to his chest. Noah couldn't have been more than 7 or 8, with curious eyes that seemed to hold wisdom beyond his years. The boy took a tentative step forward, looking at Andrew with an expression that made the billionaire's heart skip a beat. There was something hauntingly familiar in those features, something that stirred memories he couldn't quite grasp. Mommy says you're my daddy, Noah whispered, his voice small but clear in the gathering dusk. But she cries when she says it. The words hung in the air like suspended crystals, catching the last rays of sunlight and shattering them into 1,000 piercing truths. Andrew stood frozen, his world tilting on its axis as the evening shadows crept across his study floor, and everything he thought he knew about his life began to unravel. The silence that followed Noah's words seemed to stretch into infinity. Andrew's study, usually a sanctuary of order and control, felt like it was spinning around him. The little boy's innocent gaze held steady, waiting for a response that Andrew couldn't form. The rapid clicking of Maeve's shoes on hardwood broke the spell. She appeared in the doorway, face flushed and eyes wide with horror. "Noah!" Her voice cracked with emotion. "Sweetheart, what are you doing in here?" Noah turned to his mother, confusion clouding his features. "But you said—" "I'm so sorry, Mr. Caldwell." Maeve cut in quickly, her hands trembling as she reached for Noah's shoulders. He must have misunderstood something he overheard. Sometimes children get confused about adult conversations and— "It's all right," Andrew said softly, though his heart was hammering against his ribs. He forced himself to maintain his usual calm demeanor, not wanting to add to Maeve's obvious distress. "No harm done." Maeve's eyes were bright with unshed tears as she gathered Noah close. "We should go. Come on, sweetheart." She guided Noah towards the door, then paused and turned back. "Mr. Caldwell, I understand if you'd prefer to make other arrangements for the cleaning service." Andrew shook his head. "That won't be necessary." He managed a gentle smile, though his mind was reeling. "We'll see you tomorrow, Maeve." After they left, Andrew stood motionless in his study for a long time, watching darkness settle over his carefully manicured grounds. The boy's words echoed in his head, stirring up memories he'd spent years trying to forget. Sleep proved impossible that night. At 11:30, Andrew gave up trying and went to his home office. He pulled out the old leather journal he'd kept during his teenage years, its pages worn and dog-eared. His neat handwriting filled page after page with accounts of foster homes, hopes, and heartbreaks. He found what he was looking for in an entry from the summer he turned 17, a brief relationship with a girl named Sarah from his high school. But no, the timing wasn't right. That had been years before Noah's birth. He kept searching, methodically working through his personal history. At 2:15 in the morning, Andrew accessed his private server and pulled up scanned copies of his foster care records. The familiar ache returned as he read through placement after placement, each one a reminder of why he'd built such high walls around his heart. His eyes burned as dawn approached, but he couldn't stop searching. He pulled up old photographs, calendar entries, anything that might help piece together this puzzle. Could there be something he'd forgotten? Someone from his past he'd never known was pregnant? The face that kept coming back to him was Maeve's. There was something about her that had seemed familiar from the moment she'd started working in his home. The way she moved through the rooms like she already knew them. The hymn she'd been humming. The shared memories of St. Catherine's. At 6:30, Andrew made a call to his private physician, Dr. Marcus. "I need a DNA test arranged," he said quietly into the phone. "Completely confidential. Can you handle it?" "Of course, Mr. Caldwell. We can have a mobile unit come to your home today. The results usually take—" "No," Andrew interrupted. "I need something less direct. The subject is a child. I don't want to cause any distress or raise questions." There was a pause on the line. "I understand. Leave it with me. I'll arrange something discreet." Andrew ended the call and walked to his bedroom window. The sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. In less than an hour, Maeve would arrive for her regular morning cleaning. He watched from his study window at 7:25 as her familiar car pulled into the circular drive. She emerged looking tired, as though she'd had as sleepless a night as he had. Noah wasn't with her today. He would be in school. Maeve glanced up at the house as she gathered her cleaning supplies from the trunk. For a moment, their eyes met through the window. She quickly looked away, but not before Andrew caught the mix of emotions on her face. Fear, sadness, and something else he couldn't quite name. His chest felt tight as he watched her walk toward the service entrance. Hope and dread warred inside him. hope that somehow, against all odds, he might have a family he never knew about, and dread that this could all be a misunderstanding that would only lead to more disappointment. He touched the window glass, cool against his fingertips. In less than a week, the DNA test results would tell him the truth. Until then, all he could do was wait and wonder, and try to keep his walls from crumbling completely around his heart. The morning sun continued to rise, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. Andrew watched as Maeve disappeared inside the house, carrying her cleaning supplies and unknowingly holding the key to mysteries that had haunted him his entire life. The weight of unspoken questions hung in the air between them, as heavy as the morning dew on the perfectly trimmed hedges below. The following afternoon brought heavy clouds and a tension that seemed to mirror the weather. Andrew paced in his study, checking his watch for the 5th time in as many minutes. The DNA technician was due to arrive at 2 o'clock, and Maeve was downstairs dusting the living room, unaware of what was about to unfold. At precisely 2 o'clock, the doorbell chimed. Andrew's heart jumped, but he maintained his usual composed exterior as he walked to answer it. A woman in a white lab coat stood on his doorstep, carrying a sleek metal case. "Mr. Caldwell, I'm Dr. Sarah Chen from Precision Diagnostics." She offered a professional smile. "Dr. Marcus arranged for our services today." Andrew nodded, leading her inside. "Thank you for coming. Please, follow me." His voice sounded steadier than he felt. As they passed the living room, Maeve looked up from her work. Her eyes widened slightly at the sight of the lab coat, and Andrew saw her hands tighten around the dusting cloth she held. "Maeve," he said softly, "could you join us in my study for a moment?" She hesitated, her face pale but composed. "Of course, Mr. Caldwell." The three of them walked to his study in silence. Andrew gestured for Maeve to sit in one of the leather chairs while Dr. Chen set up her equipment on his desk. The afternoon light filtered through the windows, casting long shadows across the room. "Maeve," Andrew began, his voice gentle. "After what Noah said yesterday, I think we both have questions that need answers. I've arranged for DNA testing, not to accuse or demand anything, but simply to find the truth." Maeve's hands twisted in her lap. "I understand," she whispered. "I've wondered too, for so long. The timing, the memories, they all fit, but I was never certain." Dr. Chen cleared her throat softly. "The process is very simple. We'll need a cheek swab from both of you, and I can also take a sample from Noah's toothbrush if you have it available." Maeve nodded, reaching into her purse. I brought it, just in case." She pulled out a child's toothbrush wrapped in tissue paper. "I thought you might ask for this." Andrew felt his throat tighten at her preparedness, at the way she'd known without being told. They'd both been carrying this weight, this possibility, even before Noah's innocent words had brought it into the open. The testing process was clinical and quick. Dr. Chen efficiently swabbed first Andrew's cheek, then Maeve's, carefully labeling each sample. She took the toothbrush as well, explaining that results would be available within 5 to 7 days. Throughout the procedure, Maeve sat perfectly still, her eyes fixed on the window behind Andrew's desk. He noticed her hands trembling slightly and wished he knew how to comfort her, but the walls they'd both built over years of protecting themselves stood firm. After Dr. Chen left, an awkward silence filled the study. Maeve stood, smoothing her cleaning uniform with shaking hands. "I should get back to work," she said quietly. "Maeve," Andrew called as she reached the door. She paused, but didn't turn around. "Whatever the results show, thank you for being willing to find out the truth." She nodded once and left the room, leaving Andrew alone with his thoughts. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of meetings and phone calls. But Andrew's mind kept wandering to possibilities he'd never allowed himself to consider before. Evening settled over his mansion. He found himself standing in the doorway of one of his many unused bedrooms, imagining it transformed into a space for a 12-year-old boy. He could picture Noah's backpack tossed on a desk, sports posters on the walls, maybe a gaming console that father and son could play together. The word father caught in his throat. How many times had he dreamed of having a family of his own, only to push the thought away, believing it was too late? In the kitchen, he looked at his solitary place setting at the massive dining table and imagined it differently. 3 plates instead of 1, the sound of laughter and conversation filling the space where silence had reigned for so long. He could see Maeve at the other end of the table, her gentle smile warming the room, Noah between them, chattering about his day at school. Later that night, as the house settled into its usual quiet, Andrew found himself doing something he hadn't done in years. He knelt beside his bed, feeling awkward and vulnerable, and began to pray. "God," he whispered into the darkness, "I don't know if you're listening. I haven't exactly kept in touch." He tried to smile at his own attempt at humor, but tears pricked at his eyes instead. "I'm not asking for more money or success. I'm not even asking for answers anymore. All I want, all I need is honesty. Help me face whatever truth comes with Maeve. Help me be worthy of being someone's father, if that's what these test results show." His voice cracked on the last words. For a long moment, he remained kneeling, letting tears fall freely for the first time in decades. In the quiet of his room, surrounded by all the trappings of wealth that had never brought him true happiness, Andrew Caldwell finally allowed himself to hope for something money couldn't buy, a family of his own. The night wrapped around him like a gentle embrace as he finally climbed into bed. Outside his window, stars peeked through breaking clouds, as if the heavens themselves were witnessing his prayer. For the first time in years, he felt peace settling over him, regardless of what the future might hold. 2 days after the DNA samples were taken, Andrew sat in his study, staring at the preliminary email from Dr. Chen's laboratory. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows across his desk as his hands trembled holding his tablet. The words on the screen seemed to pulse with their own energy. 99.9% probability of immediate genetic relation. His heart thundered in his chest. A father. He was almost certainly Noah's father. The scientific confirmation of what Noah had innocently suggested made everything suddenly, breathtakingly real. Years of loneliness and empty success fell away as hope bloomed in his chest. Maeve was working in the kitchen when he found her, methodically organizing the pantry with the quiet efficiency he'd come to admire. She turned at his footsteps, a questioning look, crossing her face at his unusual mid-morning appearance. The preliminary results came in. Andrew said softly, his voice thick with emotion. He held out the tablet with shaking hands. "Maeve, I think this confirms what Noah said. The genetic match is almost perfect." Maeve took the tablet, her face growing pale as she read. But instead of joy or even relief, something like horror crept into her expression. She sank into one of the kitchen chairs, pressing a trembling hand to her mouth. "No," she whispered. "No, this isn't. Andrew, I never said you were Noah's father. Noah misunderstood something he overheard, but I never claimed—" She trailed off, looking lost. Confusion washed over Andrew. "But the match, I need to tell you something." Maeve interrupted, her voice barely audible. "Something I've never told anyone except Noah." She took a deep breath, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I was adopted. From St. Margaret's Home for Children, a church-run orphanage that closed down years ago." Andrew felt the room tilt slightly. St. Margaret's. The name hit him like a physical blow, stirring memories he'd tried to bury. Maeve continued, her words coming faster now, as if she couldn't hold them back any longer. I have these memories that don't make sense, dreams that feel like borrowed photographs. Sometimes I remember things I couldn't possibly have experienced, like watching snow fall through a broken window in a room I've never been in. Andrew's breath caught. The snow, the broken window, his memory. I see faces that should be strangers but feel familiar. Maeve went on, tears gathering in her eyes. I hear songs I shouldn't know the words to. For years, I thought I was losing my mind, imagining connections that couldn't exist. The hymn she'd been humming that first morning, the way she'd known where everything belonged in his house, the shared nightmares, the identical fears. It all began to shift in Andrew's mind, pieces of a puzzle rearranging themselves into an impossible new picture. The orphanage records were destroyed in a fire. Maeve said, I tried for years to find information about my birth family, but there was nothing. Just fragments of memory that didn't belong to me. Or maybe they did, but not in the way I thought. Before Andrew could respond, his phone chimed. The full DNA report had arrived. His hands shook so badly he could barely open the email attachment. Maeve watched him, her face a mirror of his own uncertainty and fear. The report was detailed, clinical, and absolutely clear. Andrew read it once, twice, 3 times, trying to make the words mean something different. But they remained unchanged, devastating in their simplicity. Maeve and Andrew shared identical genetic markers, not the partial matches of parent and child, but the complete alignment of identical twins. And there was more, a footnote that made his blood run cold. The lab had detected a 3rd genetic profile in their database matching both of theirs exactly. The paper slipped from his numb fingers, floating to the floor like the snow in their shared memory. Somewhere in the world, another person carried their exact genetic code, another sibling, another piece of their fractured identity. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence. Outside, a bird sang, oblivious to the way the world had just shifted on its axis. Andrew looked at Maeve, his sister, his twin, and saw his own shock and confusion reflected in her eyes. Words failed them both as the weight of truth settled around them like a heavy blanket. They weren't father and son. They were brother and sister, separated by a system that had stolen not only their shared childhood, but even the knowledge of each other's existence. And somewhere out there, a 3rd piece of their puzzle waited to be found. The morning sun continued to stream through the windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air between them. In that moment, neither of them could find words for the magnitude of what they'd discovered or the journey that lay ahead. They sat in silence, united by blood they'd never known they shared, as the truth of their connection rewrote everything they thought they knew about themselves and each other. The ticking of the kitchen clock seemed deafening in the silence. Maeve's hands trembled as she picked up the fallen report, her eyes scanning the words that had just rewritten their entire world. Andrew remained motionless in his chair, his usually composed face a canvas of raw emotion. Twins, Maeve whispered, testing the word on her tongue. It felt foreign, yet somehow right, like a key finally fitting into a lock she hadn't known existed. Andrew's voice was rough when he finally spoke. All this time, he pressed his fingers against his temples. All these years of building everything I thought I needed, and my own sister was right here. The word sister hung between them, beautiful and devastating. Maeve reached across the table, hesitating before touching his hand. The contact sent a jolt through both of them, not the awkward tension of their previous encounters, but something deeper, more primal. a recognition that went beyond conscious memory. "I always felt like part of me was missing," Maeve said softly. "I thought it was just the adoption, but—" She swallowed hard. "It was you. It was us." Dawn crept slowly across the kitchen floor as they sat together, sharing fragments of their separated lives. Every similarity they discovered felt like both a gift and a wound. Holidays spent alone, nightmares that matched detail for detail, an inexplicable fear of thunderstorms that had plagued them both since childhood. "St. Margaret's," Andrew said suddenly, breaking a long silence. "You said that was the name of the orphanage?" Maeve nodded. "Yes, my adoption papers listed it, but when I tried to find records years ago, everything had been destroyed in a fire." "Maybe not everything." Andrew stood, his business mindset clicking into place, like armor against overwhelming emotion. "There must be property records, tax documents, something we can trace." "The church that ran it might have records too," Maeve added, straightening in her chair. The familiar warmth of hope spread through her chest. "Even if the building's gone, the diocese might have kept files." Andrew checked his watch. 6:30 in the morning. "We can start making calls as soon as offices open." He paused, looking uncertain for the first time. Would you stay? Help me look." Maeve's smile was gentle. "Of course. I just need to call Noah's school, let them know he'll be with his after-school program today." They spent the next few hours hunched over Andrew's laptop, following digital breadcrumbs. Maeve made calls while Andrew searched databases. Each dead end only strengthened their determination. By mid-morning, they had a lead, an address for the old church building on the outskirts of town. "It's still standing," Andrew said, showing Maeve the satellite image. "Abandoned, but there." The drive was quiet, filled with unspoken questions and cautious glances. Maeve watched the familiar cityscape give way to older neighborhoods, each mile bringing them closer to their shared past. Andrew's hands were steady on the steering wheel, but she noticed how tightly he gripped it. "Tell me about Noah," he said suddenly. "My nephew." The word seemed to surprise him as much as it did her. Maeve's face softened. "He's 10. Loves science and building things. He has our way of focusing completely on whatever interests him." She paused. "He's going to have so many questions." "We all do," Andrew replied quietly. The church appeared around a bend in the road, its stone walls weathered but still proud against the afternoon sky. Stained glass windows, some broken, others intact, caught the sunlight like jewels. The parking lot was overgrown with weeds pushing through cracked pavement. They sat in the car for a long moment, both staring at the building that had been their first home. Maeve reached for Andrew's hand, and this time neither of them hesitated at the contact. "Ready?" she asked. He nodded, unable to speak. The front door was locked, but a side entrance yielded to Andrew's gentle pressure. The air inside was musty, heavy with decades of silence. Dust motes danced in shafts of colored light from the windows above. Their footsteps echoed on the wooden floor as they made their way down the central aisle. The sanctuary stretched before them, its wooden pews still arranged in neat rows. At the front, a simple cross hung on the wall, its shadow falling across the altar. Maeve's breath caught as memories, real or imagined, flickered through her mind. The sound of hymns, the smell of candle wax, the feeling of being held. Andrew stood completely still beside her, his face lifted to the vaulted ceiling. A tear traced down his cheek, catching the colored light from above. "We were here," he whispered. "Together. Before everything else, before they separated us, we were here." Maeve's own tears fell freely now. "We're here again," she said softly. Together. They stood in the empty sanctuary, surrounded by dust and memory and light, their hands still clasped. Two lives that had been forcibly separated, now reconnected in the very place where their story had begun. The feeling of homecoming washed over them both, not to this building, but to each other, to the truth of who they were, to the family they had always been meant to be. The colored light shifted as clouds passed overhead, painting patterns on the floor around them. In the silence of the abandoned church, brother and sister stood together, grieving for what had been lost, but holding tight to what had been found. Morning light filtered through dusty windows of St. Michael's Church archives, casting long shadows across shelves of aged folders and boxes. Andrew and Maeve had arrived early, determined to search through whatever records remained. The musty room smelled of old paper and forgotten memories. "I'll start with these boxes," Maeve said, pulling down a weathered container marked 1982 through 1984. Before Andrew could respond, the door creaked open. An elderly man in a clerical collar stood in the doorway, his lined face registering shock as he looked at them. "Dear Lord," he whispered, one hand gripping the door frame. "I never thought I'd see those faces again." Andrew and Maeve exchanged glances. "You recognize us?" Maeve asked carefully. The man stepped forward, his eyes moving between them. "I'm Reverend Thomas Hale. I was just starting here when you—" He paused, collecting himself. "When the three of you were brought to us." "Three?" Andrew's voice was sharp. Reverend Hale sank heavily into a nearby chair. "Please, sit down. There's much to explain, and none of it is easy." Maeve settled into a chair, while Andrew remained standing, his protective instincts on high alert. The Reverend's hands trembled slightly as he folded them in his lap. "You were brought here as newborns, identical triplets, three perfect little girls." He looked at Andrew apologetically. "Though one of you clearly was later identified differently. Why were we separated?" Maeve's voice was gentle, but her hands were clenched tight in her lap. The Reverend's face clouded with old pain. It was a different time. The church-run homes were struggling with funding. There were placement decisions made based on race, on potential adoptive families' resources. He shook his head. It wasn't right. None of it was right. You knew it was wrong even then, Andrew observed, studying the older man's face. Yes, but I was young, new to my position. I told myself the children would have better lives in separate homes than together in the system. His voice cracked. I've carried that guilt for decades. Maeve reached out, touching the Reverend's hand. You're helping us now. That matters. Reverend Hale stood suddenly, moving to a locked cabinet in the corner. His hands shook as he worked the key. I kept copies of everything. Against policy, but I couldn't. He pulled out a thick folder. I couldn't let all traces disappear. The next hours passed in a blur of documents and revelations. Adoption papers, medical records, placement notes, pieces of a puzzle they hadn't known existed. 3 baby girls, separated within weeks of each other. Maeve to a struggling but loving family in the Midwest. Andrew, listed as Emma then, to a wealthy couple who later returned her to the system. And a third sister, placed with a family that moved frequently. Lydia, Reverend Hale said, pointing to a name on a yellowed form. She was the last one placed. The family changed her name, moved out of state. Her trail goes cold after that. Andrew was already on his phone, fingers flying across the screen. I have resources, private investigators, databases. He looked up at Maeve. We can find her. They spent the afternoon in Andrew's home office, following digital breadcrumbs. Maeve made calls while Andrew's team of investigators dug deeper. Records had been altered, names changed, but money and determination wore down walls of bureaucracy. By evening, a pattern emerged. A woman named Lydia Moore, whose paper trail began suddenly when she was 17, who'd moved frequently, always alone, who now lived just 3 hours away. The age matches, Andrew said, spreading out documents across his desk. The timing of her first official records, the pattern of movement, it fits someone who might be hiding or running. Maeve stood at the window, watching darkness settle over the garden. Her voice was barely above a whisper when she spoke. Someone lived part of my life without me knowing, shared my face, my blood, my beginning. She turned to Andrew, fear evident in her eyes. What if finding her changes everything again? Andrew crossed the room, taking her hands in his. The gesture was still new, but already familiar. Everything's already changed, but we're facing it together now. Maeve nodded, squeezing his hands. But her eyes strayed to the photo they'd found in the church records. 3 identical newborns, sleeping peacefully side by side, unaware of the separation that awaited them. Together, she repeated softly, but her voice trembled with unspoken fears about what other truths might await them. The night deepened around them, full of questions without answers. Somewhere out there, a woman named Lydia Moore might hold the final pieces of their shared story. Whether those pieces would bring healing or more pain remained to be seen. They sat together in the growing darkness, brother and sister, their newly discovered bond both strengthening them and making them more vulnerable to whatever revelations awaited. The weight of this new knowledge, a third sister, another life intertwined with theirs, settled around them like a heavy cloak. Maeve's earlier words hung in the air between them, giving voice to their shared fear. Someone had lived part of their life, carried their face through the world, without them knowing. The implications of that truth were still unfolding, promising more changes to come. The cafe sat on a quiet corner, its faded blue awning fluttering in the autumn breeze. Andrew arrived first, securing a private table near the back. His fingers drummed against the polished wood as he watched the door. Maeve arrived minutes later, sliding into the seat beside him without a word. They both knew what was at stake. At exactly 2 o'clock, a woman walked in. She moved with careful precision, her eyes scanning the room before settling on their table. The resemblance was startling. 3 faces cut from the same cloth, though time and circumstance had left different marks on each. "Lydia," Maeve said softly, standing to greet her. Lydia Moore hesitated, her hand clutching her purse strap. "I almost didn't come." Her voice was rougher than Maeve's, weighted with years of caution. "But your story, it explained so much." Andrew pulled out a chair for her. "We appreciate you meeting us." They ordered coffee, the mundane ritual giving them all a moment to adjust to the surreal situation. 3 identical faces, 3 separate lives, now colliding in this unremarkable cafe on an ordinary afternoon. "I need to tell you something," Lydia began, her fingers wrapped tight around her coffee cup. "Something I've carried for years." She looked directly at Maeve. "I used your identity once. Years ago, I borrowed your life." The silence that followed was deafening. Maeve's hand trembled as she set down her cup. "What do you mean?" Lydia's words came in careful measures, like someone dismantling a bomb. "I was married to a violent man. When I finally got the courage to leave, I knew he would hunt me down. I found papers about you by accident. We looked so alike. I used that similarity to create new documents, to disappear into your life for a while." Andrew's face had gone rigid. "How is that possible?" "Corrupt officials, desperate circumstances, and enough cash to make people look the other way." Lydia's voice cracked. I didn't know about you both then. I didn't know we were related. I just knew I needed to survive. Maeve sat very still, processing. How long? 6 months, just long enough to establish a new identity, to make sure he couldn't find me. Lydia's eyes filled with tears. I never meant to harm you. I was just so scared. Andrew stood abruptly, pacing the small space behind their table. His world, so recently shaken by discovering Maeve, was crumbling again. So, memories can be borrowed. Lives can be stolen. How do we know what's real anymore? Andrew, Maeve said softly, but he shook his head. No, this isn't just about identity, theft. This is about trust, about reality itself. His voice was tight with controlled emotion. How many other lives have been lived using our faces? How many memories belong to someone else? Lydia flinched at his words, but Maeve reached across the table to take her hand. Tell us about him, about why you had to run. The story spilled out then, a charming man who turned cruel behind closed doors, years of escalating violence, a carefully planned escape. Lydia's words painted pictures of darkness, but also of determination to survive. I changed everything after those 6 months. Lydia finished. New name, new city, new life. I've been Lydia Moore ever since. Andrew had stopped pacing, but remained standing, his hands gripping the back of his chair. And now? Why agree to meet us? Because when I saw your message, saw our faces together, everything made sense. Lydia looked between them. The strange memories I couldn't place, the feelings of connection I didn't understand. We're not just similar. We're the same person split 3 ways. Maeve hadn't let go of Lydia's hand. You were doing what you had to do to survive. Maeve, Andrew protested. She stole your identity. And now she's here telling us the truth. Maeve's voice was firm. That takes courage. The afternoon light slanted through the cafe windows, casting long shadows across their table. They sat together, 3 identical strangers bound by blood and separated by circumstance, each carrying their own wounds and wisdom. I don't expect forgiveness, Lydia said quietly. But I want to be honest now. About everything. Maeve squeezed her hand. Honesty is where healing begins. Andrew finally sat back down, his anger softening as he watched the interaction between his sisters. So what now? Now, Maeve said, we face the truth together, all of it. No more secrets, no more running. Lydia's tears fell freely now. I don't deserve this kindness. It's not about deserving, Maeve replied. It's about choosing to move forward together. The cafe had emptied around them, the late afternoon sun painting the walls gold. 3 coffees sat cold and forgotten on the table, witnesses to revelations that would change them all. Together, Andrew echoed, reaching out to complete the circle of joined hands. His voice was rough with emotion. Whatever truth comes next, we face it as family. They sat there as the day faded, 3 parts of a whole finally reunited. The pain of separation, the weight of secrets, the fear of judgment, all of it laid bare on a cafe table between cooling cups of coffee and clasped hands. In that moment, they were no longer CEO, housekeeper, and survivor. They were simply siblings, bound by blood and choice, choosing to build something new from the ashes of their scattered past. 2 days after the cafe meeting, morning sunlight streamed through the broken, stained glass windows of the old church, casting rainbow patterns across the dusty wooden pews. Andrew, Maeve, and Lydia stood in the entrance, their identical faces reflecting different aspects of the same anticipation. It feels different now, Maeve said softly, her hand trailing along a weathered hymnal rack. Coming here together. Andrew nodded, his usual corporate polish softened by emotion. Last time we were searching for answers. Now we're here to remember. To heal, Lydia added, her voice barely above a whisper. They moved deeper into the sanctuary, their footsteps echoing in the sacred space. Dust motes danced in the colored light as they settled onto a front pew, shoulders touching, creating a physical connection that mirrored their genetic bond. I've always had this memory, Maeve began, of someone singing "Jesus Loves Me" at bedtime. But the voice wasn't my adoptive mother's. With the extra verse about the Bible telling us so? Lydia asked, her eyes widening. Andrew's breath caught. And the part about "little ones to him belong." They looked at each other, recognition dawning. The caretaker, Maeve whispered. Sister Margaret. She used to sing to all three of us. I remember her hands, Andrew said, surprising himself. They were always warm when she tucked us in. Lydia closed her eyes. She smelled like lavender and sugar cookies. The memories began flowing then, piece by piece, each one confirmed and expanded by the others. The way they all feared thunderstorms, the comfort of a specific blue blanket, the sound of church bells every Sunday morning. I used to think I was crazy, Lydia admitted. Having these memories that didn't fit my life. Now I know they were real. They were ours. Maeve reached for both their hands. We were together here, even if just for a little while. Andrew stood suddenly, walking to the altar rail. His fingers traced the worn wood where countless prayers had been offered. I've spent my whole life building walls to keep people out, to keep myself safe. He turned to face his sisters. But the fears I thought were mine alone, you both had them too. The fear of being left behind, Maeve said. Of not being enough, Lydia added. Of never belonging anywhere. Andrew finished. The morning light strengthened, warming the cool air. Maeve moved to join Andrew at the altar rail, pulling Lydia with her. Maybe we should pray, she suggested. Together, this time. They knelt, three heads bowed side by side, in a position that felt both foreign and familiar. Maeve began, her voice gentle but sure. Dear Lord, thank you for bringing us back together, for showing us that we were never truly alone. Lydia's voice joined in, trembling at first but growing stronger. Thank you for protection, even when we didn't know we needed it, for keeping us alive until we could find each other. There was a long pause before Andrew spoke, his corporate polish giving way to raw honesty. Thank you for sisters who show me that wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in love, in belonging, in truth. They remained kneeling, letting peace settle over them like a warm blanket. The silence was comfortable now, filled with understanding rather than questions. When they finally stood, Andrew's expression had changed. There was purpose in his eyes, the same look he got before making major business decisions. This place, he said, gesturing to the crumbling walls, it needs to be restored. The church? Maeve asked. Not just restored, rebuilt, made into something that helps other separated families reunite. Andrew's voice grew stronger with conviction. What happened to us was wrong. Using race and money to separate siblings, to deny children their true identity. It needs to be acknowledged and corrected. Lydia looked around the sanctuary with new eyes. A place of healing. Yes, Andrew said. I want to make this public. Use my influence to shed light on these practices while creating a foundation to help others affected by similar policies. Maeve squeezed his hand. From isolation to connection. From broken to whole, Lydia added. Sunlight now filled the entire sanctuary, as if heaven itself approved of their plans. They stood together at the altar, no longer three separate survivors, but one united family. come here," Maeve said, opening her arms. Andrew and Lydia stepped into her embrace without hesitation. They held each other tightly, feeling the years of separation dissolve in the warmth of their connection. In that moment, their hearts beat as one, 3 parts of a whole finally restored. The morning light wrapped around them like a blessing, and in the peaceful silence of the old church, hope bloomed like a flower breaking through concrete. Their embrace said what words couldn't, that they were finally home, finally whole, finally free to be who they were always meant to be, together. The morning dawned grey and cold, matching the storm that was about to break. Andrew sat at his kitchen counter, coffee cooling untouched beside his tablet, when his phone began buzzing incessantly. Text messages, emails, and news alerts flooded in like a digital tsunami. Caldwell Empire built on lies, CEO's secret family drama exposed, identity theft and corporate cover-up, the Caldwell triplet scandal. Breaking, billionaire CEO linked to decades-old identity fraud case. His hands trembled as he scrolled through article after article, each one more sensational than the last. Someone had leaked partial documents about their DNA tests, twisted the story of Lydia's past identity swap, and woven it into a narrative that painted him as a manipulative fraud. The doorbell rang. Janet, his personal assistant, burst in without waiting for a response. Her face was pale. "Andrew, the board is demanding an emergency meeting. The stock is already down 15%. "How did they get this?" he whispered, more to himself than to Janet. "We were going to announce it properly, with context, with dignity." His phone rang. Maeve's number. "Maeve, are you—" "They're outside my apartment," she said, her voice shaking. "Reporters. They're shouting questions about fraud and deception. Noah's scared." In the background, he could hear her son crying. "Pack a bag," Andrew said firmly. "I'm sending a car. You're coming here." But before he could make arrangements, his corporate line lit up. The board chairman's name flashed on the screen. With a heavy heart, Andrew answered. "This is unacceptable, Caldwell." The chairman barked without preamble. "The media is having a field day. Our investors are panicking. Your personal drama has become a liability to this company." "If you'd let me explain, the board expects your resignation by 5 o'clock today. No negotiations." The line went dead. Andrew stood frozen, watching 20 years of work crumble in a matter of hours. He tried calling Lydia next, but her phone went straight to voicemail. Text messages remained unread. Their newfound sister had vanished, likely overwhelmed by the sudden exposure and the guilt of her past choices coming back to haunt them all. Maeve arrived an hour later, Noah clutching her hand. The boy's eyes were red from crying, and Maeve looked shell-shocked. "They're saying terrible things," she whispered. "That we planned this, that it's some kind of scheme." Andrew pulled them both into his study, away from the growing crowd of reporters gathering at his gates. "I'm so sorry," he said. "This isn't how it was supposed to happen." His phone buzzed again. Another board member, then his PR team, then investors. Each message demanded explanations he couldn't give, solutions he didn't have. The truth seemed to matter less than the perception of scandal. By noon, the story had evolved into something unrecognizable. Social media exploded with conspiracy theories. Old business rivals seized the opportunity to question every decision he'd ever made. The simple, beautiful truth of 3 siblings reunited had been twisted into something ugly and suspicious. "I have to resign," he told Maeve softly. "The board's right. I'm damaging the company." "But that's not fair," Maeve protested. "We did nothing wrong. We're victims of what happened to us as children." Andrew smiled sadly. Sometimes the truth isn't enough, not when people prefer a more exciting story. He spent the afternoon drafting his resignation letter, each word feeling like a betrayal of the truth. Maeve tried repeatedly to reach Lydia, but their sister remained unreachable. The weight of exposure seemed to have driven her back into hiding, adding another layer of loss to their already painful day. At 4:45, Andrew submitted his resignation. By 5 o'clock, the board had accepted it and announced an interim CEO. His access to company systems was revoked by 5:15. 20 years of building something from nothing ended in less than 12 hours. "You should go home," he told Maeve that evening. "The media will lose interest in you faster if we're not seen together." "But we just found each other," Maeve said, tears in her eyes. "We're family. Sometimes family means protecting each other by staying apart." The words tasted bitter in his mouth. After they left, Andrew methodically turned off his phones, shut down his email, and closed the heavy drapes against the camera flashes still going off at his gates. In the darkness of his study, he poured himself a drink he didn't really want and sat in silence. Across town, Maeve stood in her small apartment, staring out her window at the few persistent reporters still camped outside. Noah was finally asleep, but she couldn't find rest. The truth had cost them everything: Andrew's career, their privacy, their sister's trust. The victory of finding each other had turned to ashes in less than a day. She touched the cross at her neck, a habit from childhood. Was it worth it? She whispered to the empty room. Was the truth worth such a high price? No answer came. Outside, another camera flashed, and Maeve turned away from the window, alone with her doubts in the growing darkness. The simple joy of their reunion at the church seemed like a distant dream now, replaced by the harsh reality of public judgment and private pain. They had wanted healing and found wounds instead. They had sought truth and found that sometimes truth alone wasn't enough to set you free. In 3 different locations, 3 siblings who had only just found each other now faced the night alone, separated not by the choices of others this time, but by the cruel twist of fate and public opinion that had turned their miracle into a scandal. Maeve's apartment felt smaller than ever as she moved through it in the dark, checking the locks one more time. The silence pressed in around her, broken only by Noah's soft breathing from the next room and the occasional shout of a reporter outside. The truth had cost them dearly, and she wasn't sure anymore if the price had been worth paying. The morning sun crept through the heavy drapes of Andrew's study, where he hadn't moved from his chair all night. His phone lay silent now, though the screen showed 137 missed calls. Empty coffee cups littered his desk, testament to his sleepless vigil. He picked up his phone, thumb hovering over Maeve's name in his recent calls, then set it back down. Everything he touched seemed to crumble. His company, his reputation, his newfound family. The weight of it pressed against his chest until breathing felt like work. "Mr. Caldwell?" His housekeeper's voice came through the intercom. "There are more reporters at the gate, and the board's lawyers have been calling." "No calls," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "No visitors, no exceptions." Across town, Maeve paced her small kitchen, her own phone pressed to her ear. "Please, Lydia," she said to the voicemail for the 10th time that morning. "We understand why you're scared. We don't blame you. Please, just let us know you're safe." Noah sat at the kitchen table, pushing cereal around his bowl. His eyes followed his mother's movements, taking in her wrinkled clothes, her uncombed hair, the worry lines around her mouth. "Mommy?" he asked softly. "Are we in trouble?" Maeve stopped pacing. "No, sweetheart, we're not in trouble. It's just complicated grown-up stuff." "Is Uncle Andrew mad at us?" The title uncle still felt strange, too new and fragile. "No, baby, he's just dealing with some hard things right now." Noah nodded, but his small shoulders remained tense. He could feel the fear in the air, thick as summer humidity. When the phone rang, he watched his mother's face fall as she checked the caller ID. "Hello?" Maeve answered, hope fading from her voice. "No, I'm sorry. I don't want to make any statements to the press." She hung up quickly, hands shaking. The morning dragged on. Maeve made more calls, to Andrew, to Lydia, to Reverend Hale at the old church. No one answered. Noah retreated to his room, surrounded by the whispered conversations his mother had with neighbors, with her boss, with worried friends. "I don't know what to do," he heard her say through his door. "Everything's falling apart. They're saying such awful things about him in the news. Lydia's disappeared completely. Maybe we should have left it alone." Each worried word settled like stones in Noah's small chest. He drew pictures of his family, the way it had been just days ago, when it was simple, just him and Mommy. Then he drew it the way it had been for that one perfect moment. Him, Mommy, Uncle Andrew, and Aunt Lydia, all together at the old church. The afternoon sun slanted through his window as he made his decision. If the grown-ups couldn't fix things, maybe he could. He knew where the old church was. They'd driven there several times now. That's where everything had felt right before it all went wrong. While Maeve was on another phone call, Noah slipped out the back door. He had $5 in his pocket from his piggy bank and a child's certainty that God would help him make things right. The church wasn't that far, he told himself. He could walk there. The streets grew unfamiliar quickly, but Noah pressed on. Left at the big tree. Right at the store with the blue sign. Or was it supposed to be the red sign? The shadows grew longer as afternoon faded toward evening. Back at the apartment, Maeve finally ended her last call. Her throat felt raw from talking, explaining, defending. She heated soup for dinner, calling Noah's name. No answer came. "Noah." She checked his room, finding it empty. The back door stood slightly ajar, letting in the cooling evening air. Maeve's heart stopped, then started again at double speed. "Noah." She ran outside, scanning the yard, the street, the neighbors' gardens. Nothing. Racing back inside, she called Andrew's number again, praying he would answer this time. Her hands shook as the phone rang. "Please," she whispered. "Please pick up. Our boy is missing." The sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Somewhere in the gathering darkness, a 7-year-old boy walked alone, carrying the weight of his family's broken pieces in his small hands, believing with a child's faith that he could somehow put them back together again. Maeve stood in her kitchen, phone clutched to her ear, as panic rose in her throat like tide water. The automated voicemail message played again. "You've reached Andrew Caldwell. Please leave a message." She ended the call without speaking, her breath coming in short gasps now. Noah was gone. Her baby was gone. And she had no idea how long he'd been missing while she'd been distracted by phone calls and worry and trying to hold their fractured world together. The empty apartment seemed to mock her with its silence. Noah's half-eaten breakfast still sat on the table, his drawings scattered across his bedroom floor. How had she not checked on him? How had she let everything else become more important than watching over her own child? Maeve sank to her knees in the growing darkness, prayer mixing with panic in her heart. "Please," she whispered to the empty room, to God, to anyone who might be listening. "Please let him be safe. Please help me find him." Outside, the last light faded from the sky, taking with it whatever fragile hope had survived the day's earlier devastation. Now there was only fear, sharp and cold as winter wind, as Maeve faced the terrifying reality that her son was somewhere in the darkness, alone. The flashing lights of police cars cast eerie blue shadows across Maeve's apartment complex. Her voice trembled as she described Noah to the officers for what felt like the 100th time. He's 7 years old. Brown hair, blue eyes. He was wearing a red t-shirt and jeans. And you last saw him around 3 o'clock this afternoon. The officer's pen scratched across his notepad. Yes, no, maybe. Maeve pressed her hands against her temples. I was on the phone. There were so many calls today. I should have been watching him more closely. Officers spread out across the neighborhood while Maeve stayed by the phone, praying it would ring. Each minute stretched like an hour. The clock on the wall ticked mercilessly toward midnight. She had called everyone she could think of: neighbors, Noah's school, the community center where he took swimming lessons. No one had seen him. Her phone lay silent in her lap, Andrew's number still unanswered on the screen. At 11:15, her phone finally rang. Her heart leapt, then fell when she saw it was Reverend Hale's number. Maeve? The old pastor's voice was gentle. I thought I should check the church. Sometimes when people are lost, they find their way to holy ground. Maeve's breath caught. The church? But it's so far. He couldn't have... I'm heading there now. I'll call you back. Maeve paced the floor, her shadow dancing with the police, lights still flashing outside. 15 minutes later, her phone rang again. He's here. Reverend Hale said softly. He's safe. Maeve's knees went weak. Oh, thank God, thank God. He's in the sanctuary praying. Maeve. The Reverend's voice caught. You need to hear this. All of you do. Can you come? I'm on my way. Maeve turned to the officers waiting nearby. They found him. He's at the old church. The drive to the church was a blur. Maeve's hands shook on the steering wheel as she followed the police cruiser's tail lights through the dark streets. When they arrived, she barely waited for the car to stop before rushing inside. The sanctuary was dark except for a single light near the altar. There, kneeling in front of the old wooden cross, was Noah. His small voice carried in the stillness. Dear God, he was saying, I know you can fix broken things. Mommy says you fixed her heart when she was sad. Could you please fix our family? Uncle Andrew is hiding because he thinks he made everything bad, but he didn't. And Aunt Lydia is scared, but she doesn't need to be. And Mommy... His voice wobbled. Mommy needs them both, even if she won't say it. Maeve stood frozen in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. Reverend Hale stood nearby, his own eyes glistening in the dim light. I found him like this, the Reverend whispered. He's been praying for almost an hour. Noah's voice continued, clear and trusting. I know families are supposed to stay together. That's what you want, right? So please help them remember that, and help them not be scared anymore. Amen. Maeve started forward, but Reverend Hale gently held her back. Wait, he said softly. There's someone else who needs to hear this. Heavy footsteps sounded in the entrance behind them. Maeve turned to see Andrew standing there, his usual polished appearance disheveled, his face lined with exhaustion and worry. I got your messages, he said hoarsely. All of them. I'm so sorry, Maeve. I was being a coward. Noah's head turned at the sound of voices. His face lit up. Uncle Andrew, God brought you. I knew he would. He ran to them, throwing his arms around both Maeve and Andrew. Maeve knelt, gathering her son close, her tears falling into his hair. Noah, baby, you scared me so much. Why did you run away? I had to, he said simply. This is where our family started. This is where God can fix it. Andrew knelt beside them, his usual reserve cracking. Noah, I've been so foolish. I thought I was protecting everyone by staying away, but I was just running from love because I was afraid. You don't need to be afraid, Noah said, reaching for his hand. We're family. That's what Mommy always says. Family sticks together, no matter what. Maeve looked up at her brother, her twin, her miracle, her family found and almost lost again. He's right, Andrew. We've spent too many years alone. We can't let fear separate us again. Andrew's composure finally broke completely. Tears rolled down his cheeks as he pulled both Maeve and Noah into his arms. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "When the news broke, I panicked. I thought I'd ruined everything. Your life, your career. None of that matters," Maeve said firmly. "What matters is this, right here. Us, together. The truth about who we are." Reverend Hale stepped forward, laying his hands on their shoulders. "The truth will set you free," he said softly. "But sometimes it takes a child's faith to show us the way." Noah wiggled in their embrace. "Does this mean we're going to be a real family now? All of us?" "Yes," Andrew said, his voice growing stronger. "Yes, it does. And we need to find Lydia too. She's part of this. Part of us. She'll come back," Noah said with complete confidence. "I asked God to bring her home too." Maeve laughed through her tears, holding her son close. Around them, the old church seemed to glow with warmth, despite the late hour, as if the very walls remembered the babies they had once sheltered, the family that had been broken here and was now, finally, beginning to heal. They stayed there, holding each other, their tears mingling with laughter and prayers of thanksgiving. Outside, the night was deep and dark, but inside the sanctuary, something bright and beautiful was being restored, a family coming home to each other at last. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Andrew's home office, casting long shadows across the polished hardwood floor. He stood before the mirror, adjusting his tie with trembling fingers. This wasn't the confident CEO persona he'd worn for years. Today, he was simply a brother seeking justice for his family. Maeve appeared in the doorway, dressed in a simple blue dress that matched her eyes. Their eyes. "Are you ready?" she asked softly. Andrew turned to face her. "I've spent my whole life being ready for everything except this," he admitted. "But it's time for the truth." They drove together to the press conference location, a small auditorium at the community center near the old church. It felt right to do this here, close to where their story began. Noah sat between them in the back seat, holding both their hands. "Remember what you told me last night?" Noah asked, squeezing Andrew's fingers. "About how sometimes being brave means telling the truth even when you're scared?" Andrew smiled, his nephew's words steadying him. "I remember, buddy. Thank you for reminding me." The auditorium was packed with reporters, cameras flashing as Andrew took his place at the podium. Maeve stood slightly behind him, her quiet presence giving him strength. He looked out at the sea of faces, took a deep breath, and began to speak. 28 years ago, 3 babies were born in this community. Identical triplets, 2 boys and a girl. Those children were separated, not because of necessity or their best interests, but because of a broken system that valued convenience over connection. I stand before you today as one of those children. The room fell silent, cameras clicking softly in the stillness. "You know me as Andrew Caldwell, CEO of Caldwell Industries. What you don't know is that I spent my childhood in foster care, carrying a void I couldn't name. What you don't know is that the woman standing beside me, Maeve Walker, is my sister, my twin, a piece of my heart I never knew was missing until she walked into my life." He gestured to Maeve, who stepped forward, her head held high despite the tears shining in her eyes. The system that separated us was built on discrimination and financial pressures. Children were sorted and placed based on race, economic potential, and the arbitrary judgments of those in power. This wasn't just our story. It happened to countless families. Today, I'm not here to defend my reputation or my company. I'm here to shine a light on an injustice that has remained in shadows for too long. A reporter raised her hand. "Mr. Caldwell, What about the allegations of identity fraud? Andrew's voice grew gentler. That brings me to another part of our story. Our sister, yes, there is a third, was trapped in an abusive marriage. In her desperate attempt to escape, she briefly assumed a false identity. She did what she had to do to survive. And today... He paused, scanning the crowd. At the back of the room, the doors opened quietly. Lydia Moore stepped inside, her face pale but determined. Maeve immediately went to her, taking her hand and leading her forward. The sisters stood together, their matching features causing a ripple of murmurs through the crowd. Today, Andrew continued, his voice strong and clear, we stand together, not as CEO and employees, not as victims and perpetrators, but as family. We're here to advocate for change, for transparency in adoption records, for reform in child placement practices, for support systems that protect the vulnerable without destroying family bonds. The questions came rapid fire after that, but Andrew handled each one with honest simplicity. He didn't hide behind corporate speak or legal jargon. He spoke from his heart about the pain of growing up alone, about the miracle of finding his sisters, about the healing power of truth and forgiveness. Maeve stepped to the microphone at one point, her gentle voice carrying clearly. We're not angry anymore, she said. We're grateful. Grateful to have found each other, grateful for the chance to make things right. Our story isn't about scandal, it's about hope. Lydia spoke too, her words halting at first but growing stronger. I made mistakes, she admitted. I was scared and desperate. But Maeve and Andrew have shown me what real family means. It means no one gets left behind. No one is beyond forgiveness. As the morning wore on, the tone in the room began to shift. The aggressive questions became more thoughtful. The camera flashes seemed less intrusive. Reporters started asking about their plans for reform, about the foundation Andrew was establishing to help reunite separated families. Noah, who had been sitting quietly with Reverend Hale in the front row, suddenly stood up. Can I say something? He asked loudly. The reporters chuckled, cameras turning toward him. Andrew smiled and nodded, lifting his nephew onto the stage. My mum always says that love is bigger than fear, Noah announced, his clear voice carrying to every corner. And now I have the biggest family ever, because everybody stopped being afraid and started telling the truth. Maybe other kids could find their families too, if we help them. A soft murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. One of the reporters wiped her eyes. Another lowered his camera, just listening. Later that afternoon, the first headlines began appearing online. Caldwell CEO reveals family separation scandal, calls for reform. Separated triplets reunited, a story of hope and healing. From corporate power to social change, Caldwell's new mission. Maeve read them on her phone as they sat together in Andrew's living room, exhausted but at peace. Lydia had stayed this time, curled up in an armchair with Noah showing her his favorite book. Andrew watched them all, his heart full. People are listening, Maeve said softly. Really listening. Look at these comments. She showed him her screen, filled with messages of support, stories from other families separated by the system, offers to help with their foundation. The truth really does set you free, Andrew murmured, remembering Reverend Hale's words. I spent so many years building walls to protect myself. All I really needed was to let them fall. And what did you find when they fell? Maeve asked, though she knew the answer. Andrew looked around at his family. The family he never thought he'd have, the love he never thought he deserved. Everything, he said simply. I found everything. 6 weeks after the press conference, the autumn sun cast long shadows across the newly renovated church grounds. Where crumbling brick and broken windows had once stood, warm light now spilled from freshly installed panes. The old sanctuary had been transformed into a welcoming community space, its wooden pews replaced with comfortable seating areas and resource centers. Andrew Caldwell stood in what used to be his corporate office, now bare except for a few boxes. He carefully packed the last of his personal items, family photos that now included Maeve and Lydia, Noah's crayon drawings, and the original DNA test results that had changed everything. The corporate world that had once defined him felt distant now, like a suit he'd outgrown. His phone buzzed with a message from Maeve. "The painters just finished the community center sign. Want to see?" He smiled, remembering how naturally Maeve had stepped into her role as the center's director. Her experience as both a former foster child and a mother gave her unique insight into what families truly needed. She had spent weeks developing programs, hiring staff, and creating a warm, welcoming environment where broken families could find healing. Across town, Lydia was giving her third speaking engagement of the week. Her voice, once hesitant, now carried strength as she shared her story with a room full of domestic violence survivors. "Your past doesn't define you," she told them, her words resonating with hard-won truth. "There's always hope for a new beginning." The afternoon sun was setting when Andrew arrived at the newly renamed Maeve Haven Community Center. The sign gleamed in fresh paint, "Where families find their way home." Maeve stood in the parking lot, directing volunteers who were setting up chairs for tomorrow's opening ceremony. "Look who finally escaped the corporate jungle," she teased, hugging her brother. "How does it feel to be officially retired at 40? Andrew laughed, a sound that came easier these days. "Retired is definitely the wrong word. I've never worked harder." He gestured to the building. "But this feels right." Inside, the transformation was even more striking. The main hall housed a modern computer lab where people could search adoption records and connect with resources. Comfortable counseling rooms lined one wing, while the other contained classrooms for parenting classes and support groups. The old chapel had become a multi-purpose room, its stained glass windows preserved as a reminder of the building's history. Noah darted past them, carrying a stack of programs for tomorrow's ceremony. "Uncle Andrew, come see what we did in the kids' room." The children's area was Noah's pride and joy. He had helped design it himself, insisting on bright colors and plenty of places where kids could feel safe while their parents got help. A wall of photographs showed successful family reunions, including their own story. Lydia arrived as the sun was setting, looking tired but satisfied after her speaking engagement. "You wouldn't believe how many people came up afterward wanting to help," she said, joining her siblings. "The Foundation's volunteer list keeps growing." The three of them stood together, taking in their surroundings. The legal reparations fund Andrew had established was already helping dozens of families affected by unethical adoption practices. Maeve's programs were fully booked. Lydia's advocacy work was opening doors and changing minds. "Remember when we first stood here?" Maeve asked softly. "In the dark, with all those years of pain between us?" Andrew nodded, squeezing her hand. "Now look at us. Look at what truth and forgiveness built." They worked late into the night, preparing for the opening ceremony. Volunteers hung banners and arranged chairs while caterers set up in the new kitchen. Noah fell asleep on one of the comfortable couches, surrounded by program booklets. Morning arrived clear and bright. People began arriving early, former foster children searching for family connections, parents seeking support, community leaders, and media representatives. But this time, the cameras felt different. They were there to document hope, not scandal. Reverend Hale, now the center's spiritual advisor, opened the ceremony with a prayer. His voice, strong despite his age, carried to every corner of the packed room. Lord, let this place be a lighthouse for the lost, a haven for the hurting, and a testimony to your power to restore what was broken. Maeve spoke next, her quiet confidence touching hearts as she outlined the center's mission. Every child deserves to know where they come from, she said. Every parent deserves support in keeping their family whole, and when separation happens, everyone deserves help in finding their way back home. Lydia shared her story again, but this time with her siblings standing beside her. Healing isn't just about the past, she explained. It's about creating a better future. It's about breaking cycles and building bridges. When Andrew stepped up to speak, he kept his words simple and from the heart. 6 weeks ago, I thought I was losing everything, he admitted. My company, my reputation, my carefully constructed life. Instead, I gained what I'd been searching for all along: family, purpose, and the chance to make things right. He announced the expansion of the legal fund, drawing applause when he revealed how many families had already been helped. But the biggest response came when he introduced the center's staff, all former foster children or adoptees themselves, each one committed to helping others navigate the journey home. The ceremony concluded with Noah and several other children cutting a ribbon across the main entrance. As it fell away, sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, painting the gathered crowd in rainbow colors. People moved through the building afterward, exploring resources and sharing stories. Maeve led tours, her natural warmth making everyone feel welcome. Lydia connected with other advocates, already planning future collaborations. Andrew watched it all, feeling a deeper satisfaction than any corporate success had ever brought him. Late that afternoon, as the crowd thinned, the siblings found themselves back in the main hall. Noah was teaching some younger children a clapping game, while Reverend Hale looked on with a gentle smile. So, Maeve said, looking at her brothers and sister, was it worth it? All the truth-telling and pain and change? Lydia touched the wall of reunion photos. Every bit of it. Andrew watched a young mother being embraced by her long-lost daughter near the resource center. This is just the beginning, he said softly. Think of all the families still waiting to find their way home. The setting sun painted the room in warm light, catching the words newly carved above the door. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love never fails. In that moment, standing together in the space they had created, they were more than survivors of separation. They were proof that broken things could be made beautiful again, that truth could heal what time had hidden, and that it's never too late for love to find its way home. The autumn breeze rustled through the changing leaves as Maeve walked up the familiar path to Andrew's mansion. 3 months had passed since the community center's opening, and the subtle shift of seasons mirrored the gentle changes in their lives. The once imposing house now felt different, warmer, lived in, filled with the kind of comfortable chaos that only family could bring. Through the kitchen window, she could see Andrew attempting to teach Noah how to make pancakes. Flour dusted both their faces, and the counter looked like a baking war zone. But their laughter, visible even through the glass, made the mess worthwhile. "You're supposed to flip it, not wear it," Andrew's voice carried as Maeve let herself in through the side door. Noah's giggles echoed through the kitchen. "I think it's stuck to the ceiling," Noah announced proudly, pointing upward where, indeed, half a pancake clung stubbornly to the spotless surface. Maeve cleared her throat, trying to maintain a straight face. "I see breakfast is going well?" "Aunt Lydia says cooking is creative expression," Noah declared, quoting their latest family dinner conversation. "We're being very creative." Andrew shot Maeve a helpless look, but his eyes sparkled with joy. Every Sunday morning now belonged to them. Pancakes, stories, and the kind of easy togetherness that once seemed impossible. Sometimes Lydia joined them, bringing her famous cinnamon rolls and updates about her advocacy work. Other times it was just the three of them, building the kind of memories that had been stolen from them decades ago. "Need a rescue?" Maeve asked, already reaching for the spatula. "Please," Andrew admitted, stepping back from the stove. "I can run multinational corporations, but apparently pancakes are beyond my skill set." Noah hopped down from his step stool, leaving floury footprints across the floor. "Uncle Dad makes them funny shapes. Look." He held up a plate containing what might have been attempts at animals, if the animals had suffered unfortunate accidents. Maeve's heart melted at the name. It had started spontaneously a few weeks ago, born from Noah's natural ability to see truth in its simplest form. Andrew wasn't just Uncle Andrew anymore, but he wasn't trying to replace Noah's father either. He was both, and somehow the childish compound name captured that perfectly. While Maeve rescued breakfast, Andrew and Noah set about cleaning up their creative expression. The simple domestic scene struck her suddenly. How natural it felt. How right. The mansion that had once seemed so cold now held warmth in every corner. "Remember when you wouldn't even let anyone else in the kitchen?" she asked Andrew softly, as Noah chased down escaped flour dust bunnies with a mini broom. Andrew paused, dish towel in hand. "I remember thinking being alone was safer." He watched Noah with a gentle expression. "Now I can't imagine going back to that silence." Their weekly gatherings had become sacred time. Sometimes they talked about the past, piecing together memories, sharing stories, healing old wounds. Other times they focused entirely on the present. Noah's school projects, Lydia's latest advocacy victory, Maeve's work at the center, or Andrew's new consulting role helping ethical adoption agencies. "Mail's here," Noah announced, returning from his flower hunting expedition. "Can I sort it, Uncle Dad?" "Go ahead, buddy." Andrew smiled at the name, as he always did. Noah had developed an elaborate system for sorting the family's mail when they were all together. Bills went in the boring stuff pile. Work things were grown-up business. Anything with pictures or colors qualified as fun mail. "Look." Noah held up a large envelope. "The center sent pictures." They gathered around the kitchen island as Noah carefully opened the envelope. Inside were photographs from their latest family reunion event at the center. Dozens of separated families had found each other through their programs now. Each success story felt like a small miracle. "There's us." Noah pointed to a candid shot of the three of them, plus Lydia, caught mid-laugh during the picnic portion of the day. The photographer had captured something special, the way they leaned toward each other unconsciously, the matching crinkles around their eyes, the comfortable belonging that radiated from their poses. Maeve felt tears prick at her eyes. "I never thought we'd have pictures like this," she admitted. "Family photos always felt like something other people got to have." Andrew wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Now we have too many to count. Noah's right. We need a bigger album. And a bigger fridge," Noah added, eyeing the already photo-covered appliance critically. "Uncle Dad needs one just for family stuff." The morning stretched on peacefully. They ate slightly misshapen pancakes, shared stories about their week, and planned the upcoming holiday celebrations. Noah insisted on documenting everything in his family journal, a growing collection of drawings, tickets, photos, and memories that captured their journey from strangers to family. "Mom?" Noah asked later, as they prepared to head home. "Can we show Uncle Dad my school project tomorrow? The one about different kinds of families?" Maeve smiled, watching Andrew's face light up at the invitation. "I think that's a wonderful idea, sweetheart. I'll clear my whole schedule," Andrew promised solemnly. though they all knew he'd already arranged his work around their regular Monday dinner. As they gathered their things to leave, Noah hugged Andrew tight. "Love you, Uncle Dad. Thanks for the crazy pancakes." Andrew's eyes met Maeve's over their son's head, both of them understanding the precious gift they'd been given. Love hadn't diminished when it changed shape. It had grown stronger, deeper, more complete. What started as a search for truth had blossomed into something more beautiful than any of them could have imagined. "Love you too, buddy," Andrew replied, his voice rough with emotion. "See you tomorrow." Walking to the car, Noah chattering about his project plans, Maeve looked back at the mansion. Sunlight caught the windows, warming the stern facade into something welcoming. Like their hearts, like their lives, like love itself, transformed but undiminished, made stronger by truth and more beautiful for having been broken and rebuilt. Noah waved enthusiastically from the car window. "Bye, Uncle Dad. Don't forget to practice your pancake flipping." Andrew's laughter followed them down the driveway, the sound of joy echoing in the space where silence used to live. The autumn sun cast long shadows through the stained glass windows of the rebuilt church, painting the wooden pews in gentle colors. The renovation had preserved the building's historic charm while breathing new life into its tired bones, much like the family that now gathered within its walls. Andrew sat in the front pew, watching as Noah helped arrange hymnals with careful precision. The boy had grown an inch taller in these past months, but his infectious smile remained the same. Maeve and Lydia chatted quietly near the piano, their identical profiles highlighted by the evening light. Reverend Hale, now a cherished family friend, nodded to them from the pulpit. "Shall we begin?" The familiar melody rose softly at first, the very hymn that had stirred Andrew's memories that fateful morning when Maeve first entered his home. Amazing Maeve, how sweet the sound. The words filled the sanctuary, carried by their joined voices. Andrew's throat tightened as he remembered how that tune had unsettled him, months ago, making him feel exposed and vulnerable. Now it felt like coming home. He glanced at Maeve, who caught his eye with a knowing smile. They had both carried this melody in their hearts since infancy, a thread of connection neither time nor distance could break. Noah's clear young voice rang out alongside theirs, slightly off-key but full of joy. He had insisted on learning every verse, proud to share in this piece of his family's story. Lydia swayed gently to the rhythm, her hand resting on Maeve's shoulder, a gesture that spoke of healing and forgiveness. As the final notes faded into the peaceful quiet of the sanctuary, Andrew felt the weight of gratitude settle in his chest. They had weathered storms together, public scrutiny, personal doubt, the painful process of rebuilding trust. But love had proven stronger than fear, truth more powerful than secrets. "Remember when we first stood here?" Maeve whispered, reaching for his hand. "Everything was broken then." Andrew squeezed her fingers gently. "Not everything. The truth was waiting here all along." Noah bounced, over to them, his sneakers squeaking on the polished floor. "Can we show Uncle Dad the new children's room?" he asked eagerly. "I helped paint the mural." The children's wing had been Lydia's special project, a bright, welcoming space where families could meet, play, and heal together. The mural stretched across an entire wall, depicting a tree with branches reaching towards the ceiling. Photos of reunited families decorated its leaves, creating a living testament to hope. "It's beautiful," Andrew said, genuine pride in his voice. "Just like the family that inspired it." Reverend Hale joined them, his weathered face creased in a warm smile. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," he mused. "When I first saw you two standing in this church months ago, I knew he was writing a story of redemption. More like rewriting." Lydia added softly, giving us all a chance to understand love in its truest form. They gathered in a circle, hands joined naturally, no longer strangers, no longer lost. The evening light wrapped around them like a blessing, while outside the world continued its busy pace. But here, in this sacred space, they had found an unshakable peace. "Uncle Dad?" Noah tugged at Andrew's sleeve. "Will you tell the story again? About how you found each other?" Andrew looked at his sisters' faces, Maeve's gentle strength, Lydia's hard-won serenity, and felt profound gratitude for the truth that had transformed their lives. "It's a story about love that refused to be mislabeled," he began, "about how God's plan was bigger than our fear." The tale unfolded again, cherished and familiar now. They each added their pieces, Maeve speaking of faith that sustained her, Lydia of courage to face mistakes, Noah of childhood wisdom that sometimes saw clearest of all. Their voices wove together like the harmony of their earlier hymn, creating something beautiful from what was once broken. As darkness gathered outside, candles flickered to life in the sanctuary windows. Their small family stood together in the gentle light, bound not by obligation but by choice, by truth, by love that had found its proper name at last. "This is what stability feels like," Maeve said softly, watching Noah lean sleepily against Andrew's side. "Not walls or wealth or certainty, but belonging to each other, exactly as we are." Andrew nodded, understanding completely. His life had once been measured in accounts and assets, in carefully controlled solitude. Now it overflowed with something far more precious, the messy, beautiful reality of family love. The hymn's melody lingered in the air, a reminder of where their story began and how far they'd come. In this moment of quiet joy, surrounded by those who knew him best, Andrew finally felt the peace he'd spent a lifetime seeking. It wasn't found in success or solitude, but in the courage to let love write a new story, one of dignity restored, faith renewed, and family chosen. They stood together in the warm light of their rebuilt sanctuary, their hearts as restored as the walls around them. The truth had named their love correctly at last, and in that naming had made it unshakable. "Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart."